Good evening, everyone, and welcome to tonight's webinar here with me at Novastar Prep. Thank you all so much for joining us tonight. This is a specific webinar for the families of Lake Braddock, and we're happy to be bringing this to you tonight. We are going to get started just now. A couple things to go over before we dive into tonight's topic related to mock tests, the SAT in general, test prep, and all those good things. I did want to mention tonight that while the chat is disabled, we do have the Q&A open. So please feel free to pop questions into there. As I go through the presentation, I'll be sure to grab some. And if I don't get to it, I will get to it right at the end, of course. The other piece too is that you may have noticed tonight's webinar is being recorded. So if you miss any little pieces of it, if you would like to share it with a family that couldn't make it here tonight, you will be receiving the link to that, and you'll be able to reference it for future questions you might have, or to share it with anyone who may need some additional information regarding mock tests and the SAT. So without further ado, we can get into that topic tonight, but you will receive all of the information after tonight's presentation as well. As you can see on the screen here, for those of you who are not familiar with Novastar Prep, we partner with Lake Braddock's PTSA to provide mock test opportunities, other educational opportunities, and a plethora of educational options for students, including comprehensive tutoring across all subjects and all grade levels. So whether it's pre-K or you've got a junior in college who needs help with an advanced calculus class, we have the tutors for that. Of course, you all are here tonight regarding test prep, and we do consider ourselves experts in that regard for both SAT, ACT, and any other types of standardized tests, whether that's IB tests, AP tests, GRE, GMAT, LSAT, things of that nature. I started here as a college coach, and we have a college readiness team helping out with admissions. And one highlight of our services that I love sharing with people, and it's one of the reasons I love working here, is every family has a dedicated success advisor working with them to make sure that everything's going smoothly, to anticipate future educational milestones, and to simply act as a resource. Tonight, though, we are going to be covering navigating SAT success. This is some insights specifically for the upcoming mock test that you all will be having with us, or any that you choose to participate in. And we'll be sharing some insights into that, as well as, what mock tests mean, some things about strategy, all of that good stuff. Just a little bit about me. I won't go too long here, but I am Bernadette Smith. I am the Academic Sales Director here at Novastar Prep. I'm a licensed high school guidance counselor, school counselor up here in Massachusetts with over 10 years of experience. So I've been a school counselor both in private and public settings, and so a little bit of a varied experience there with different types of schools and smaller and larger populations, but always working with high school students towards their post-secondary goals. I've been a college coach for over a decade as well, working individually with clients to help them reach their goals and really make the process more manageable, less overwhelming, and break it down into pieces that can feel really manageable over time, and to help them develop a really strong admissions profile. As you're probably all aware, admissions changes frequently, so having somebody in your corner can be helpful, and I like keeping up to date with all of this. I joke that I have to update this at some point with the 15+ years of experience as a writing tutor, because it's probably a little bit more than that now. But 15+ will cover it for at least a little while longer. But I've been a writing tutor for a very long time, ELA tutor, anything with English language arts or literature, and a college English instructor. So been a tutor for a long time, love working for a company focused on having really tremendous tutors, working with really tremendous kids. And there is my email address if you have any questions for me. It will be up there again, but pretty easy, Bernadette@novastarprep.com. So here's tonight's agenda. We will be covering SAT prep strategies. So some general things. Of course, all students are different and are going to require different levels of prep for the SAT itself, but we will be going over some general things to understand, then diving into mock tests and how they work, why they're beneficial, and why a student should choose to take one as part of their test prep journey. Then I wanted to dedicate a little bit of time to test optional policies. Forgive me if you joined me last night for a full test optional policy webinar, but it won't be repetitive of all that information, but I will give you all an overview because that keeps changing all the time. So it'll be good to get a sense of that and what it means for your student. Then we'll touch on the topic of SAT versus ACT, and this will have a big asterisk next to it because the ACT is changing too. So that will have some information for you as well. And then just really the path to test day and some parent takeaways. All right, so first and foremost, we're going to dive into some test prep strategies. As I mentioned, all students are different, all students learn differently, and there are a multitude of approaches here. As you see different suggestions about what grade level to start in or anything about when you should take your first test, please keep in mind that we have students starting at all different times throughout the school year. Some students take their very first test, what is considered late, and it works out great for them. Other students start testing right now as sophomores. We have the occasional ninth grader who takes the test, people who spread it out over years, people who spread it out over a 3-month span. So while there are some recommendations, there's no one cookie cutter way to preparing for this test. As standardized as it is, you're never behind, and we can always be here to help. So number one I list here is to take a mock test early. There are a bunch of reasons for doing so, but most importantly, it's a really no harm, no foul way to provide a baseline score. The families that I meet with when we go over the results from these tests, it's really a sense to provide them with, imagine it was test day. This is what the score turned out to be. You're not sending it to anyone. No one has record of this, but me, you, and the kid, and we can see what it means and get into the details of every section so that you can find out what to prep for versus trying to study the entire test. It also can help alleviate some anxiety and things like that, but it helps identify those strengths and weaknesses and gives them an opportunity to get used to the test without it being an official test day in a high stakes environment. It does really simulate that environment, both with in-person tests that Lake Braddock can have, as well as our virtual live proctored tests. So it is a timed test based completely on the official SAT, and we are about coming up on a year anniversary of the SAT going fully digital and adaptive. And this is because students can use this to analyze results and focus their study efforts more efficiently versus, again, trying to tackle this mammoth test without guidance. The next step of this is to review the results and create a personalized prep plan with an expert. And what happens is any student and family that participates in a mock test with us has the opportunity to meet with somebody like myself after the test and my colleagues, Jennifer Fazia, et cetera, to have an opportunity to just go through everything, answer your questions, go into the subtypes of questions that are within it, look at the practice questions, see where you landed in terms of Module 1 versus Module 2, know what it means for your grade level, what it means nationally, what it means in terms of your students' performance by section and question type, and provide some clear steps to improve their score. We want to talk about what their goals are. We want to talk about what are manageable steps, what are realistic goals to set over certain periods of time, and just frankly to break down the results. Just looking at a 1260 or a 1330 doesn't really tell you exactly what a student is incredibly competent in, what areas they need support in, do they just need help with comma usage, whatever it might be. This is a chance to break it down with expert support in a setting. This comes with your mock test. It's nothing you need to add on, and a chance to talk to a professional about what it means and get your questions answered based specifically on your child's results. And then, of course, you want to use that customized plan to prep. A customized plan is tailored to your students' unique strengths and weaknesses. And so, again, that's why we always say, families will ask us, what's the exact curriculum that our student will follow upon starting test prep? And there's no set perfect answer to that, because while there are hallmarks of test prep and certain strategies that we recommend for all students and ways to drill questions. And of course, there's a million types of practice materials out there. We do tailor it specifically to the student's needs, to their strengths and weaknesses, and to their ultimate SAT score goals. So while there are elements that will look the same, some typically suggested timeframes to engage in prep, and also some typically suggested frequency and duration of prep and homework, of course, it's going to be different for each student. You want to also be spending this time to focus on high impact areas for maximum improvement. You know, a student may get one of the vocabulary questions wrong and then spin their wheels on vocabulary for too long, not realizing they should have been spending some more time on punctuation and grammar. A student may feel like they have to occupy all of their time with the advanced math questions, but forgot to refresh on the geometry concepts that they learned 2 years ago. So you want to make sure you're using the customized plan to focus on those high impact areas. This comes in the form of tutoring, practice tests, strategy sessions, and recommendations for independent study as well. So in a typical format, again, tailored to individual needs, this looks like regular weekly tutoring, periodic mock tests to measure progress, and strategy as you get closer to test day. And then in terms of general strategies, that's what you do with the mock test and how you move from there. But in terms of the strategies for the test itself, there are a few core suggestions that we have as a company and what our tutors really believe in when it comes to prepping students for the SAT in general, but this new version of the SAT that we've been with for the past year. And so number one for us is to practice with purpose. Consistent practice using full-length timed mock tests can really help simulate test day conditions. The reason we suggest this as a frequent thing, and for example, we have 10 mock tests available on our digital SAT platform, is for building stamina. As much as we're thrilled that they made the test shorter and that it's now only 2 hours and 15 minutes long, it is an endurance activity for students to make it through such a long, high stakes test. It's a lot of staring at a screen now that it's digital, and we do want students to build up test day stamina before it's the high stakes day itself. So consistent practice with these full-length tests will really help with that. So there's a purpose to taking these full-length tests besides just exposure to questions and real test day. It's the timing of itself and building that endurance. It helps identify those weak areas and improve time management. We don't want to leave time management to the end. We want to consistently be working on that because we never want the reason to be a student loses points be that they ran out of time or that they bookmarked a bunch of questions to come back to and never had the time to, so they couldn't think more critically about them, switch their answer, whatever it might be. We offer multiple live and online and in-person mock tests to reduce that kind of test day anxiety. The more a student goes through it with us, the more prepared they can be for when they walk into a testing center to take their first official test. And then, the next thing we would recommend here is targeted practice. And while that sounds pretty self-explanatory, we do recommend that students focus on specific question types that need improvement. There's a tendency to want to just, okay, I'm going to focus on verbal today and jump around on certain questions. Then tomorrow I'm going to focus on math and jump around on those. But you're going to want to focus on the types that are popping up the most. Is it questions within algebra that are related to linear equations and one variable and you can't remember how to do it because it was part of Algebra 1 and you haven't done it in a while? Really focusing on those specific types of questions that pop up in the SAT. The benefit of this is it allows the student to focus on their efforts on what will yield the highest score for them. Like two students can have a 1220 and both of them have the same score and have very different areas to work on. And so with a personalized prep plan, it's going to be based on those practice test results so that you know that you're working on those specific question types that need improvement. And then review and analyze mistakes. It's hard to see the ones that you got wrong on there, and it can be tough to go through those. But reviewing those incorrect answers can really help with preparing for them on the next test. And of course, that makes total sense, but really understanding why they're wrong. So part of our mock test, when you look at the results, you're going to see an explanation as to why choice A is correct and then why B, C, and D are wrong. Getting that understanding isn't just about like, now I know the definition of the word impress because it's the answer for this question. It's also about understanding why the other three answers are wrong. And so for that, you want to make sure that you're reviewing every question you got wrong and then going through all of the questions on the test again. On our mock test, you can hide the correct answers too after you complete it and try it again and just go through and see if you are able to come up with the right answer there. But this is really helpful in terms of avoiding repeated mistakes. Typically speaking, on any mock test, we can see patterns of different types of questions where a student might struggle or where they might spend too much time on one question, not enough time on another. With this advanced data-driven platform, we can pinpoint those exact areas, see a little bit more than you can see from a Blue Book practice test, for example, because you can dive into the sub-question types. You can't do that with the official Blue Book practice test. This allows you to go in and be like, okay, it really is end of sentence versus within sentence punctuation that I need to work on now. And this is why it was wrong to put a comma here, and understanding those nuances so that you feel better about it once it's coming up again as a question, and you can notice those little things that will pinpoint and point out to you that you need to choose the semicolon in that situation. And then to build test-taking strategies. This is where time management and particular guessing strategies come into play because the SAT does not have a wrong answer penalty. Used to, years ago, back when I took it, you did lose a quarter of a point for a wrong answer. That's not the case now. And so for that, we want students to have appropriate guessing strategies for when it comes down to 50-50 choice, or when they're really not even sure how to begin an equation for a particular math problem. What's your guessing practice going into that test? Is it, and it comes up with the student produced responses. How do I guess on one where I have to write in the answer? Different things where you need to, prepare for that and not just have a willy-nilly approach to it as you're going through it on the official test. So a lot of that will come down to, like I said, time management, knowing when to move on from a question and plan to come back to it, knowing, how to speed up your reading on certain excerpts and what keywords just to look for. This is helpful for the SAT, but then also for test taking in general, trying to look for little hints to help you get to the right answer. This is going to help students maximize their score, even if they don't know the answer to every question. So since we know there's no wrong answer penalty, we know that guessing isn't going to hurt us, but what if we get it right? What if, and then that's adding some more points to your score. Students that work with our tutors will get specific tips about these strategies for them individually. There are some students who are going to approach time management by answering the first 5 questions and then jumping to the last question and coming backwards. Other students that doesn't work for, and they need to see it in a more linear approach. Our tutors get to know the students, and then we'll teach them which one makes the most sense from them after watching them do timed exercises. All right, and then now we have number 25. This is about mastering key content areas that have the highest impact. So algebra has the highest impact in the math section. We know that the SAT is a much more algebra-focused test than the ACT. The ACT has far more geometry on it, for example. So knowing that the algebra section has a few more questions in it, you'll notice that it's a longer section in both Module 1 and Module 2, that's going to be an area to focus a lot of energy. Then we also know that evidence-based reading in the verbal section carries a lot of weight as well. So focusing on those types of questions. This knowledge across the board is going to boost a student's score. We don't want, we know that some students were going to forget the beginning of algebra, that get out of practice with certain things, but they're doing very well in advanced math, for example, and they're on to AP Pre-Calc, they're in Calc AB, whatever it might be. But we want to focus on the things that have the highest impact here so that we can maximize a student's score. And then here we recommend engaging in active learning. This is when a student can explain the answers aloud or teach you, their parent, how to solve one of the questions. I mean, while it terrifies me to look at some of those math questions and gives me some flashbacks to high school, it's certainly advantageous for students to show and be able to see themselves show how much they understand a particular question. To read it out loud can be really helpful. That's a tip I give to all of my students, certainly. And teaching someone how to do it. That's a skill for any type of test. Going through, my daughter was reading us geometry proofs a couple weeks ago and reading them out loud to us, and she felt much better after explaining them to us when she went ahead and took her test. So things like that to reinforce the knowledge. So this is where the tutor comes in and will ask the student to teach it to them. This is where you as the parent can come in and ask them, like, hey, can you explain how you got to -200 on this equivalent expressions question? How did you get to this answer? And have them work through it with you. It reinforces it and makes that knowledge stick a little bit more so into their heads. All right. So those were the tips. I don't know if there were any questions. I don't see any in the Q&A right now in terms of the general strategies, but I did want to include, 6 of them there just in terms of what we recommend in general for test prep that's applicable to all students that can be really helpful. And these are the first steps to really improving one's score and just feeling more confident about the test. And now we're going to talk more about, the March 1st mock tests leading up to the May 3rd official test. This can also be leading up to the June test. Everyone's on a different trajectory right now, but just looking at one where we have a certain amount of weeks in front of us before the official test hits. And so if we're looking at this model, and like I said, some of you may have students who are taking the March 8th SAT, you can still look at it this way because you can use either the mock test results or the official test results to help inform some decisions for May or June as you look at the later spring official test dates. And so as we know, there is no April SAT. So what we would say here, and I left in December there, but I'll alter that for you, but you want to take the mock test for March 1st. So register and take the March 1st mock test. You can come take one with us in December next year too, certainly. But you want to register for that one. And certainly you'll get some links from us after this about how to register for it if you haven't already. After taking the test, you and your students should meet with an advisor like myself to review the results, understand the performance by each module and what that really means, especially in terms of the adaptive scoring of the test, and then receive that personalized prep plan that we mentioned before. So when you register for the test, you're given an option to book a consultation with us for after test day. You'll also be sent a reminder after you take the test as well. So those meetings are meant to be for after the test is completed, but obviously, of course, you can reach out to us with questions before. You'll walk away with that understanding the scores better and with recommendations for next steps, whether it's for the May test, the June, or looking ahead even further. Then you want to make sure you register for the May 3rd SAT, or as I mentioned, the June test as well. The last day to register for the May SAT is April 18th. Please do keep in mind that the May and June SATs are very popular. If you wait till the last minute to register, you may find yourself in a test center that is an hour and a half, 2 hours away from home. Depending on where you live and the population, sometimes certain test centers will fill up very quickly. And that adds a level of stress in the morning to having to commute to the test and, a level of inconvenience for parents who have students that don't have driver's license yet, that can make it a little tougher. So if you're thinking about it, just try to be a little earlier, maybe not up against the wire on April 18th there. Just try to get it in so that you can make sure you're testing closer to home. Then, of course, we would recommend participating in one-on-one tutoring. This would be, after the mock test, or you can certainly start before the mock test and use the mock test as a marker with it. To get in, if it's, after March 1st, 9 weeks of customized prep before the May 3rd test. That gives you the possibility of having 2 sessions a week, an hour and a half apiece, one of verbal, one of math, leading up to test day. Then wait for the results, reassess the plan, and then plan for the next test. I don't typically recommend taking the May then the June. Some students it works, but you have a small window of time in between those two. So you may be taking the May and then planning for the August. You may be taking the June and planning for the August. With this plan, you get to know the tutor, you do a lot of confidence building strategies, working on content, mastering different areas before the May test. Then you set your plan for the summer before the August test or perhaps the October. It gives you plenty of time, sets students up to be in a position to super score. Another mock test will happen during tutoring, of course, but obviously if you are not engaging in tutoring with us, there is the option to continue to take mock tests with us. And certainly that can be on official mock test days, but if one of those doesn't work for you at a particular point, please do reach out to me. We can set it up with you individually so that your student is able to take it at a time that works for them. And then, like I said, plan for the next test. I just mentioned that, but you want to use those results and recent mock test results to plan for the next test and to, look at the year in a sense of 3 tests, for example. So if you're taking the June and then you're taking the October, your next one might be the March if you're a rising junior. That could put you in a good spot. There are some, rising, sophomores right now that are planning some different things. There are some rising seniors that are planning different approaches. But one way to work it is to look at it in 3s and see how you can plan that over the year so that you have enough time to super score, you have enough time to prep, and then you can breathe a little bit about college readiness, building the college list, and working on that GPA. All right, so now we're going to get into mock test explained. And so this is where I'm going to show you a little bit more about what they actually entail. And so that you can see how much it mimics the actual test and just what you're going to actually see within it. If there's any questions whatsoever, and I'm looking over to my second screen to see in the Q&A if there are any questions about that kind of roadmap towards the mock test and the official test, please do let me know. But for now, we'll hop into the mock tests themselves. So I mentioned this earlier, but it doesn't hurt to reiterate that a mock test really does simulate test day. This is why we don't have students pause it. There's no break to play video games. There's no, I'm going to come back to half of the math later. This is about building that stamina, understanding the real pressure, the pacing, and the question types. So granted, if you're taking it at home, sure, it doesn't feel like sitting in the high school cafeteria, but you can make it so that you're in a quiet, distraction-free environment. Set aside 2.5 hours for yourself, a little bit of a window there, a cushion on the sides, and work it out. And then, of course, we have the in-person tests at Lake Braddock as well. And then identify the strengths and weaknesses through the mock tests. It's the easiest, no harm, no foul way to do so, and see where they excel and where they need a little bit of help. It builds confidence because nobody likes walking into a test blind. I think looking back to when I did, I'm pretty sure that's what I did. And I just went in and was like, I guess I'll take this test. I took the PSAT, I assume. It's in the distant past now. But, this is a chance for them to really feel like they know the test, they know what to expect, they know how many of each type of question they may encounter. And it allows the family to plan effectively and then use those results to guide prep. Our mock test format, we've been using it for 1.5 years, if not more so at this point, from when they first announced the international and pilot digital SATs that started before they released the national SAT in the digital format here in the United States in March of 2024. So our test is adaptive, just like that test. If you're unfamiliar with the adaptive nature about it, we can certainly go over it. And as we look at certain slides, I can show you a little bit about that. But it does work with the same item response theory. It is going to score it the same exact way. Same number of questions, same timing on every section. And the module orders are exactly the same. So you're going to take reading and writing module 1 with us, then reading and writing module 2. Then you're going to have a break, then you're going to take math module 1, then math module 2. And that's exactly what you'll find on official test day as well. And so in terms of the appearance and navigation of the test, when your students log on, maybe some of you've had kids with us that have taken it before, this is what they will see. They're going to see that one of the mock tests is available to them. If they've taken more than one, it will be a different test than number one. And they will see that they can only start with reading and writing. It's a 64-minute section split into 2 modules, so 2 32-minute sections. This is where they'll start, they'll go into it. Once they finish that section, then math will automatically unlock. So just like on the official test, they can never skip ahead to math. They can certainly, while they're still in good time, jump around in module 1 to go answer questions that they wanted to come back to. But once you're in module 2, you can't go back to module 1. And then of course, once you're in math, you can't go back to reading and writing. So similar, we used to have it on the page where it just said stop and you couldn't, or don't go back to this next page. This will not allow them to do so. They have the same instructions and tools as they would find on an official SAT, so they know exactly how much time they have, that they can click on begin section. They have a highlight feature that will really be helpful on those different reading and writing questions that require some annotation and pulling out the main idea, or the ones that are rhetorical synthesis questions where you need to just pick out what facts from a student's notes help them achieve their research goal. So very helpful there. Of course, they have the cross out feature, so the same as us crossing it out to get to a 50-50 shot on a question. And they also have the flag feature, which I often refer to as bookmarking, where they can just note questions they would like to come back to within the module that they're currently on. And then, this is what I mentioned before in terms of booking a consultation with one of me or my colleagues. During registration and after test completion, you'll book a free consultation with a test prep advisor. This is where you'll get to review the results, explore that in-depth analysis that I mentioned in terms of those question subtypes, timing, what we notice in terms of patterns, and then receive that personalized prep plan for your child. Students will have access to their digital SAT workbook because of participating in this test. So with participation in the test comes a full workbook with 1,400 practice questions and their results for 1 full year. So those practice questions are fantastic. We're always adding more, we're adding updates, and it's a great way to get continued exposure to the tests and the types of questions. And then it allows them to filter them and just work on the questions that would be most helpful and impactful to their score. So there's a lot of great features that make it very user-friendly and can make it a great tool to add to their arsenal of test prep resources as they get ready for the test. They'll see a score overview like this, where they'll have their official score, or sorry, unofficial because it's a mock test, but they'll have their full total score out of the 1,600 listed at the top, and then a breakdown of reading and writing and math. So when I mentioned before that we have an adaptive scoring mode going on in the test as it is on the official test, this is where you can see it, for example. So adaptive scoring is that a student's performance in module 1 of reading and writing dictates how difficult module 2 is. Same thing in math. Students' percentage correct here dictates how difficult module 2 is. And students can only test into module 2 easy or module 2 hard. There's no in between. While the test has easy, medium, and hard questions, you can only test into those 2 separate versions. Typically speaking, this looks like getting anywhere between 68 and 71% correct on module 1. Then you would test into module 2 hard. Under that, what would happen is, oh, sorry about that. Under that, what would happen is that a student would test into module 2 easy. And what that does is it essentially caps their score total for reading and writing as the highest it can be 600 if they get everything correct on that second module. And so what that means is, it's capping your score because they're giving you an easier second section. So if a student tests into hard, they have the full complement of 800 points on both sections. And the same thing goes here. If they were to test into module 2 easy here, highest they could get would be 600. So the way we look at it today, we want to make sure all students test in a module 2 hard so that they can maximize their score. So sometimes tutoring is working towards that, making sure we get them in there consistently. And then what do you do once you get there and you're only given one easy question, 11 hard questions, and a bulk of medium? And it feels a lot harder. The timing feels a lot more difficult. And if you have any questions about adaptive scoring, please do let me know. Then they'll get a nice breakdown of their reading and writing and all of the modules, of course, but here we're looking just at reading and writing module 1. And they'll get to see how many easy questions they received, how many medium, how many hard. And then they'll get to see how they did by content domain. So you can see here the 4 content domains that are exactly the same as the official test. Craft and structure, which has a lot of vocabulary in it, different things about text structure and purpose. Expression of ideas is mostly transition-related words like therefore, however, furthermore, and then rhetorical synthesis, which those are those questions I mentioned that look like a set of notes a student took and picking out only the information that helps them achieve a goal. Information and ideas is all what's the main idea of this text, and also filling in the end of a sentence with, for example, what theory most closely supports a claim being made. So you'll see that section, there'll be some, difficult ones there for sure. And then in standard English conventions, this is all punctuation and grammar. And I can tell you that every student I meet with, for the most part, gets 1 or 2 wrong on that section, because grammar and punctuation aren't taught the way that they used to be, and everybody has Grammarly. So don't be shocked when you see one in that regard. All students will have the chance, and we'll do this during a consultation as well, to review their answers and see what answer they chose, for example. Then it also shows what percentage of students also chose that answer. And that would be the thousands of students who have taken the test before, not just other Lake Braddock students. And then they'll also get to see what the correct answer is. And same thing here on this one, the student got it correct, and you can see the percentages of the other answers there. They can see the exact question. They can go on to the next one. And then what's really great, this is what I mentioned before, they get a solution here. So they get to see why choice D is the best answer, why choice A, B, and C are the incorrect answers. And then if they click on follow-up exercises, it filters all of our practice questions to ones that are exactly like that question of the same difficulty level. So this is a really tremendous way for students to hyper-focus their prep, really understand the questions they already answered, reinforce the concepts they felt really good about, and then really understand, okay, I see why choice D is better here, and that's going to help me for the next time. All right, so that was the format of the test. We're going to talk a little bit about SAT and ACT now. So if there's any questions at all, I don't see any there, which is good. And if you want to send them to me later, feel free. But we are going to talk a little bit about the difference between the 2 tests. Oftentimes, parents will ask me, which one is better for my child? Do colleges care about one versus the other? Is there a major preference for the ACT at certain schools? Will they let you, are there any test optional policies that are just about one? It's not as complicated as that. The vast majority of schools accept both, and they're interchangeable. There's a concordance table that will show you what an SAT scores means on an ACT scale and vice versa. I think one of the examples I gave yesterday was that, a 24 on the ACT is equal to an 1160 to an 1190 on the SAT, for example. And excuse me. So a lot of different things here. This comes up a lot about the different types of math and what is it, which students excel more on which types of tests. But some of this, it's changing a little bit as we come up to it. So what happens over the years is when the College Board changes something and the SAT changes, but give it a year and then the ACT is going to change similarly. And then the ACT is going to change something, and then the College Board is going to change something. And this typically happens, of course, they're in competition with one another, so it makes sense. But right now, we know that the SAT is digital, adaptive. It has more algebra on it than the ACT. fewer what we refer to as time-wasting grammar questions, where it's trying to find the wrong thing. So like, or like which of these isn't the wrong answer and things like that. So a little bit backwards in their wording there. And the SAT is shorter in duration. The current ACT is digital and paper-based. So students have the choice right now. And so right now it had been that digital was available at certain locations. Now it's going to be more widespread. Paper is available everywhere. ACT says they are committed to keeping the paper test available. It is not adaptive. You will find more geometry on the ACT. The digital test is also not adaptive for them. I have not heard plans of them doing that, and definitely not for the next year for sure. There is a science section that was required, is now going to be optional. I'll show you that on the next section. And there's an optional writing section. So generally speaking, before we hit spring of 2025, which we're in right now, these were the differences between the tests. The new ACT is coming this spring. And so what you see here is the time frame for that. And of course, this is a tough time to be a high school student the last couple of years because they keep changing their standardized testing. But what you'll see here is that in April of 2025, students who choose to take the test online will experience more flexibility and choice, a shorter test, and more time per question. So that is not, so if you choose to take the paper-based test in April, it will still be longer. If you take the digital version of the ACT, it's going to be shorter. So keep that in mind for duration purposes. When they say more flexibility, that's because they're going to be given the option to not do the science section online. They will not be required to do it. They're also going to be giving more time per question because of the shortening of the test and the removal of certain number of questions, but also on certain questions, they're going to go from having 5 multiple choice responses to having 4, to making the choice a bit easier. So again, that is April 2025 just for the online tests. So if you choose to take the paper, which is still available, it will be longer. You will still have to take the science section. Then in September of 2025, all students testing on a Saturday, whether online or on paper, will benefit from those enhancements. So essentially, that's when they're saying the paper-based version will be shortened and ready to go, is September 2025 on a Saturday test day. Then onward from there, the ACT plans to offer both paper-based tests and digital tests simultaneously for this foreseeable future. What that really means, I mean, about 2 years ago, they said they were not going to do an online test, and they changed their mind about that. So if you're keen on taking a paper-based test, certainly take advantage of this while it lasts. But the key thing to keep in mind is the test will be shorter, so that will no longer be a reason to not take the ACT. And there will be the option to opt out of the science section, and you can continue to opt out of the writing section. Most colleges do not look at the writing section on the ACT, so I wouldn't worry about it very much. But for the science section, some students would like to have a STEM score, and that is what's needed for it. You can take a practice ACT with us and see a lot of students do well on the science section. So if you feel like it's going to help, it can be worth it to tack it on, but of course that makes the test a tiny bit longer. They're not specific science questions like you would find on an AP Bio exam or AP Chem, but more about understanding the scientific method, being able to read charts and graphs. A STEM score can be nice to have. Of course, colleges care a little bit more about those AP scores and those advanced science classes that you're taking, but it can be a nice thing to have, certainly if you feel more inclined in that way. And so we talked about this already. So National Online ACT will have all those changes April 2025, paper and international ACT September 2025, and then in-school testing, that's not coming until April of 2026. So that's a little bit of a different thing. That's when you host an ACT day. That's a little bit different. But for everybody's purposes here, online tests in April moving forward, shorter, optional science section, more choices. Then come September, paper and online, same thing. And so I mentioned this, these are the specifics, reduction in the total number of questions. They've dropped 44 of them. They've shortened the test duration from 195 minutes to 125 minutes. There is more time per question. Those reduced answer choices for math questions from 5 to 4, and the option to take the test without the science section. So those are the main changes. As I said, they are not adaptive. And, picking the right test, this can kind of come down to a few things. Right now, circumstance. There's more SAT practice resources right now because they're changing the ACT. There is one ACT practice test available on the ACT website, and not a lot of other materials. So one thing you can do is, if you're deciding between the two, right now there are more resources for the SAT, and that they have been in a digital format for almost a full year now. So they've worked out the kinks. They know what all the practice questions are available. You can take a digital SAT mock test with us and get a sense of the adaptive nature. Consider test familiarity and past success. If you've previously performed well on an ACT practice test, or you prefer its content, like for example, if you want to take a science section, or if you prefer geometry, you can stick with the ACT. We've been given every indication that a current ACT practice test will still be very helpful to the new ACT. Obviously, the timing will be very different. So in terms of learning how to pace yourself, it's going to be a little off. So if you feel more inclined towards the geometry, the science, things like that, it's still a very viable test option for you. But remember, we just don't have as many practice. And when I say we, I mean the industry, for the ACT format. We will be releasing several ACT tests that match the new format, but of course it's just coming out now. So we're at the beginning of that. For the class of 2026, consider sticking with the SAT for now. It's critical test prep time, and take a practice ACT with us. And then, there's no, you can take a paper test if you'd like in the April test date, or you can try the virtual shortened one. And then for class of 2027 and younger, take a mock test now, and then take a mock new ACT when it's available, and compare and contrast. You have plenty of time there. Obviously, these are individual conversations too, so please do feel free to book a consultation to talk about it and to see what makes the most sense for you or your student. So some final takeaways here. I know I'm sending a lot of information right now. Just want to share, the SAT is known to emphasize concise reading passages and analytical thinking. The ACT includes longer reading passages and an emphasis on science and data analysis. If you want that STEM score, consider taking the ACT. And as I mentioned this already, college values strong science grades and AP IB exam scores. So it's not mandatory if you're going into science to take it, but certainly it doesn't hurt. All right, so that was the differences between the SAT, the ACT, and the new ACT changes. Now we're going to talk briefly about test optional policies, just to give you a sense of where we are with it now, and kind of what it all means. And I think, we have a decent amount of time left to cover this, so I'll hop into it now. So understanding the policies, there's not just one umbrella test optional policy out in the United States. There's several of them. So there's general test optional, which scores are not required but can be submitted. So this is what you'll see at a lot of schools. They'll just refer to themselves as test optional, and you can still get a sense of what they typically accept. But they're saying it doesn't have a bearing on acceptance if you don't submit it. For that, there's a couple of asterisks with that at different schools, which we refer to as conditional test optional. That would be that specific programs require it while the overall school does not. So that would be, a lot of times this happens in nursing programs. They are very small in terms of their student to teacher ratio, and they need more data to inform the selection of their students for these very highly selective programs. This can happen in a lot of the STEM majors as well. You can see this with engineering a lot, or specific programs within engineering looking for the math score on the SAT, for example. Then there are test blind schools. These are schools that do not want your SAT even if you send it to them. They won't even look at it. It's very hard to submit it to them. If you mail it to them, they're not going to look at it. And those do exist out there. Test flexible, this would be when they are like, we don't require the SAT or the ACT, but we'll take a test of yours. We do require a test. So you can send us an SAT, or you can send us a couple of AP scores, or you can send us a couple of IB scores, or you can send us the ACT. So they'll require a score, but not, it doesn't have to be the SAT or the ACT. Or they might be test flexible and say, we're like test optional, but you can also send us an AP score or not. And so a little bit of different approach there. This is why it's really important to look at the admissions websites for the schools you are interested in to make sure, one, their policy hasn't changed. Two, they haven't made announcements about changing it in the future, because sometimes they'll announce, okay, for the admission cycle of 2027, we plan to go back to test required. But also to see what they do for test flexible. It's certainly not every school, but it is becoming more popular so that they can see how you do on other standardized tests. And then the last one here would also be placement required. This is where scores may determine first year course placement, like your first year math class or your first year English class. This happens at some schools where they say, you don't have to submit it as part of the admissions process, but before orientation, we need to see your SAT score to make a placement. If they already have it from you, great. If not, then you need to send it. Other schools will have you take the AccuPlacer or a placement test that they develop, or they'll simply look at your GPA and make the determination based on that. And then, the other piece we talk about a lot is what is referred to as the submitter advantage. This happens at selective and highly selective schools where score submitters are admitted at a higher rate. So I have a couple examples here. In the full test optional webinar, there's a plethora of examples, but I did want to give one here where, for example, at UVA, the overall admit rate was 20%, but 72% of the 9,875 students accepted did submit test scores. So there's a couple ways to look at that. It's a very difficult school to get into. Naturally speaking, a lot of students would want to submit scores to be competitive, but it's also telling us that odds are if you submit a score that's in their range that they've well documented, that you likely have that score submitter advantage there. Again, there's a lot of specifics to this. There's percentages they've worked out about, like, for example, what is the score submitter advantage at Boston College? We've looked at it at, Georgia Tech, you can see here. And they've gone back to test required since this information came back, actually. So it's all in flux all the time, but there is a submitter advantage, and it is apparent at certain schools. 79% of the admitted students at Georgia Tech for the cycle before they changed back to test required last year had submitted scores. Tufts University, for example, went back to test required because they felt as though some students weren't coming to school as prepared as they had thought. And think about it, Tufts is an extremely selective school. They felt as though not including the data from a test score was hurting their admission cycle, and that more students were on academic probation. And some of that is due to what we're seeing in the field related to GPA inflation. So you will see certain schools coming out with this a slight greater emphasis on test scores in certain cases. And then, of course, there's the other things here where it opens doors to opportunities. It can increase eligibility for honors programs. West Virginia requires a 1230 for their honors program, for example. UVA has some specific ones for one of theirs, like the PEAK program there. And then oftentimes there's access to larger merit scholarships, like Hofstra University, for example, reserves their top scholarships for score submitters. Some schools will only look at GPA for merit-based, others look at GPA and some other accomplishments. Some require that it's GPA and SAT/ACT score. Local scholarships, a lot of them will also, even if it's like the American Vets Scholarship that they're giving out, will also ask for it. So you want to look at those ones that are individual to your town as well. All right. And then the last one I always mention is letting the test scores speak. And of course, we know that Lake Braddock has a robust curriculum and a wide variety of classes available. So some of these, For example, like the second bullet here, highlight potential in lieu of limited access to advanced coursework, may not be the case for many students at Lake Braddock. But in other students, some schools that are in more rural locations or very small school populations, some very tiny private schools too, this may happen where they don't offer as many AP classes, there's no IB programming, dual enrollment isn't readily available, that sometimes hyper-focusing on a standardized test like this can show your potential despite a lack of resources. So again, this may not be the case in Lake Braddock, but it's something to keep in mind for students where that could be affecting them. But what it can also do is showcase a strength that's not reflected in the transcript, or there's a little blip on the transcript, right? Maybe ninth grade math didn't go as well as you had hoped, and SAT math went really well for you. It shows that growth that colleges love to see. And as I mentioned, at times it can help you bypass placement tests at many colleges. All right, so that is a lot of the information regarding all of the test prep, test optional policies, the SAT versus the ACT, what the mock test looks like, everything about test prep strategies. And now finally, we'll just look at, mock test day, your pathway to test day with Novastar Prep. So as I mentioned before, the next steps really are to take a mock test. If you're taking the next one with us, we're looking forward to seeing you there. If there's other dates that work better for you, we're constantly, we offer a mock test every single month. So always check back on the Lake Braddock page that we have, and I'll send that to all of you. But certainly if none of those dates work for you, reach out to me directly and I will get you set up. And then book a consultation either during registration or after test day for after the test so we can review the results. And come meet with me or one of my colleagues over here at Novastar. Then I would suggest enrolling in customized tutoring. This is for the kid who walks out with a 1450 and the kid who walks out with a 980. Everybody needs a little bit of help for this because it's a very specific test. And then track progress, retaking practice tests and measure that improvement. And some takeaways I put here for parents, just to help your students, encourage that consistency that we talked about earlier in tonight's presentation. You want to help your child stay on track by having a regular study schedule. Having a tutor really helps with that because there's certain expectations set every week rather than, go in your room and study for 30 minutes. This can be like you're held accountable by a third party outside of the house and not part of the school, which can be really helpful. But just making sure time is allocated for both the test prep itself and then outside practice. Provide support for that practice, that quiet, distraction-free environment, but also be there for them if they want to explain how they solved a problem to you or if they want to teach you something about the SAT. Of course, and everyone here, you wouldn't be attending this if you weren't already a cheerleader of your students, but just be positive about it. It stresses kids out. They talk about it a lot, endlessly at school. All they talk about is, did you take this yet? What did you get on the PSAT? Do you have your college list yet? And it just becomes a narrative of, a lot of stress and pressure. So just continue to be their cheerleader and keep them in a positive mindset. And then, of course, track the progress together. Stay involved by reviewing those practice test results, get a sense of what's changed, what patterns are out there, and reinforce that sense of accomplishment. It's a singular day sitting in a room taking a test, and it's, one piece of the puzzle. Every step towards getting better at the test is an accomplishment, but it's not the end all be all of their future. It's extremely helpful. We know it's still very important to admissions, but just track that progress together and see the growth. All right. And so we do have a March 1st mock SAT that has all of these features that we talked about today, the digital workbook, the personalized prep plan, the detailed analysis. Again, I'll be sending you links to sign up for everything, certainly, but just keep in mind that that's one that's coming up pretty quick. And then also, if you want to dive a little deeper into the new ACT, we do have a webinar on the digital SAT and the new ACT on March 12th. And this is another Wednesday night to go over the specifics. One of our fantastic test prep coaches, Ashley, is going to be going over all the ins and outs of both tests. And you will walk away feeling better about your choice between the two and getting any of your questions answered. She's absolutely fantastic. One of our best coaches and teachers. She does a lot of our boot camps and other things like that. So I'll send you all a link to this so you can join us. And you can also look ahead in the future too to a lot more college-related ones. This time of year, we start to shift gears too to ones about the college list, college essay, everything about building the admissions profile, application boot camp, things like that. And you can look ahead to those and always check our webinar page to sign up for future webinars also. And last but not least, for those of you who attended tonight, I did want to let you know that you're open to one of our promos that is just for you all tonight. So it's buy 10 hours, get 2 free. And just as long as you book it before next Friday, you can take advantage of this. So this is a really great way to get started with, for example, 6 hours of verbal and 6 hours of math for the SAT. But also this can be applied to any academic class. This can be applied to college coaching, whatever makes the most sense for you and your student at this time. So I'll send that to you in the email as well so that you all can have that and make sure that you take advantage of it and get those savings. And lastly, I need to move this slide over. Sorry, I know it's a little cut off there, and I'll send this to you, but if you have any questions about the mock test itself, and like taking it with Lake Braddock, please reach out to my lovely colleague, Karen Prem at karen@novastarprep.com. She will get you all situated if you need to move a mock test registration, if you need to cancel and switch it to another day, if you have any questions about accommodations on the test, for example, she can get your students set up that way. And then if you have any questions for me, Bernadette@novastarprep.com, or feel free to pop a question into the Q&A now. I know we just hit the 8 o'clock mark, so I do want to be conscientious of everyone's time, but if anything's in there, I don't think there are right now, you can certainly send them my way, and I'd be happy to be of assistance and act as a resource. All right, well then other than that, I really appreciate everyone's time tonight and letting me talk at you for an hour about the SAT and mock tests and the ACT and test optional policies. I hope this was really helpful to all of you, and I hope it gave you some insights as you approach this next step with your children. So I wish you all a great evening. Please do reach out to me and expect an email from me shortly with all the links we discussed tonight, and of course the webinar recording as well. Thank you all, and I'll see you at the next one. Take care.